Dobrý večer, dámy a pánové. Vítám vás na Heurékafe, setkání, na které si zveme různé zajímavé hosty, kteří nás mohou něčím inspirovat, od kterých se můžeme něco nového naučit, nebo kteří nám mohou něco nového předat. Téma, které jsme si zvolili pro dnešní už 4. Heurékafe, se týká knížek a čtenářství. Jak probudit v dětech lásku ke knížkám a proč vlastně? Jak to udělat v dnešním rychlém světě, kdy papírovým knížkám konkuruje lákavý svět onlineu a sociálních sítí? Jak nadchnout děti ke čtení? A jak to doma celé uchopit, aby čtení bavilo děti i vás? Otázek je spousta. Jsme moc rádi, že pozvání do Heuréky dnes přijala Kathy Zabinski, která působí jako literacy coach v International School of Prague a celý svůj profesní život se vlastně věnuje podpoře čtenářství. Dnešním večerem nás bude provázet Jan Kala, zakladatel sítě škol Heuréka. A ještě než Honzovi předám slovo, mám tady pár technických informací. Kdo nás sledujete ve videozáznamu, můžete sledovat originální znění v angličtině anebo si přepnout do druhého videa na simultánní překlad v češtině. Z technických důvodů bohužel v rozhovoru navazujeme až po několika otázkách. A teď už vám přeji hezký poslech.
It's got the final surprise, or it's a full story, but you still need like just a couple of words and they are repeating, right? So they are successful at the end. Right?
Yeah, that's so important what you're saying, because it creates what we call a reading identity. Yeah. And so that sense of I am a reader, that is very empowering and motivational.
Yeah.
And to say that I can read books and I can read all these books, and that kind of fuels the desire to keep learning.
Yeah, and we are talking about like very young children, like 3, 4, 5 years old. And so, what do you think parents can do to create love for reading, when they have like such young children?
Yeah. I think there's this book has a cartoon. I always think of it because it's called Reading Magic. It's by Mem Fox, and it says why reading aloud to our children will change their lives forever. And she has a cartoon in here that says simply the book, the child, the adult, and reading aloud. So it's basically saying that what parents can do is spend time with their kids, with books, reading to them, and having fun. You know, that it's a cozy, snuggly time. Maybe it's a bedtime routine every night. But it's that pleasure, because what we enjoy, we spend more time doing. And so finding lots of different books. Sometimes if you're on a long car trip, listening to a book together, going to libraries together. All of those ways of finding books that you love. And also being willing to read the same book 29 times, because your children will ask you to read. I brought, this is a book, my daughter who is 24, the cover fell off. She loved this book so much. Honestly, it's not that great a book, but she loved it. And she loved cats so much. And I think I've read it more than 100 times, you know, but I made up my own stories after a while. I abandoned the words but you know, it was the two of us loving books together. So, yeah. Yeah,
it's also, you mentioned like making your own stories, right? So you can understand, you can not use the book just one way, right?
Right, because that's an important comprehension skill, right? So reading is not just decoding, it's also comprehending. And one thing I can do is use the pictures to understand what's happening and tell my story from that. And so it's how we can start practicing comprehension.
Yeah, I really learned that in ISP you're trying to help children to make reading strategies like even before they know the letters, right? Like making predictions and so on. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're going to sit down and read a story, like if I had 2 or 3-year-olds here and I had a book I want to read, before I even open it, I can show them the cover and say, what do you think is going to happen? What are your predictions? And so the thinking and the habit really of seeing reading is something that requires comprehension and thinking. You can start so young.
Yeah. I also know you organize, I think it was not you personally, but your colleague organized a reading workshop for toddlers, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, maybe when we are thinking about a little bit older children, like say grade 1, grade 2, and in the Czech Republic we usually focus on reading techniques and after that on grammar. So what do you think teachers or schools can do to support a love for reading in grade 1, grade 2?
I think one of the most important things is ourselves as teachers to be very passionate and to love books ourselves. Because young children at that age especially, they tend to love what their teachers love. So if you make a big deal out of it and you love it, then that will become their favorite book. And I often, as a teacher myself, or when I'm working with groups of teachers, I encourage reading aloud and then keeping that basket of books right there for children to access. I think that beyond that, for children learning to read, one thing that really matters is volume of reading. How many books are they reading? Like, let's think about anything we do, whether it's learning how to swim or play a violin or pretty much anything. It actually just requires hours. The more time we do it, the better we'll be. So one of the things we can do in those years is provide plenty of time with books, and books that children can actually read. So sometimes people go so far as to say hard books hurt children because they can't practice reading. They need to be able to have a book that they can read, so that they're able to practice their reading skills. So those are some of the things at that age.
Yeah, and what about the classrooms? How shall classroom look like to support reading, a love of reading?
Yeah, I've so enjoyed walking around here. Because one of my rules of thumb is that a child should be able to see a book no matter where they're sitting in the classroom. The book should be part of the fabric of learning. Yeah. So. And
this, I guess, this the same for home, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And we are also trying to, what I would like to ask you, what is your opinion? We are trying to find different spaces where children can sit and can enjoy the book. We have 15 minutes after lunch. Kids go out to play outside for 30 minutes, and they have 15 minutes independent reading. And we are trying to really create the spaces, little tiny spaces for the kids where they can go and sit or lay down and enjoy reading. Actually, one of the favorite places is the one on the, I don't know how to call it, the stove, right?
Yeah, I saw it when I came in. I would like to go there with a book. I curl up with the stuffed animals,
So I see in ISP that you are trying to do the same thing, right? Create different spaces. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it just goes back to that kind of the joy of reading, creating that feeling.
Yeah, and what about because I think a lot of schools have school libraries, and what about having the difference between school libraries and classroom libraries?
Wow. Okay, that is a great question. I work very closely with librarians to develop a relationship between those two. So sometimes in the classroom library, we'll get maybe the first or second book in a series, and then she gets all the rest in the library. So you try to hook a child on a series in your classroom, and then you can't really have all of them in your classroom library, but then maybe you go to the other library to get them. So we do work in tandem. Also, librarians are just amazing at knowing what children love, you know, and I think that's such an important part of classroom libraries, being able to put a book into kids' hands and say, oh, this is going to be a great book for you. But it changes over time, like what kind of books are really hooking children. So librarians see that, and then they can tell you, get this book into your classroom library because kids love it. So they work together.
Yeah. And what about reading aloud? To what age do you think teachers and parents should read aloud to kids? Or maybe teachers first?
I know that time is always a challenge in the school day. I know as children get older, teachers feel they have less time available to dedicate to reading aloud. Even in high school, though, there are times where just there's power in reading a passage aloud. As a regular routine part of the day, reading aloud typically lasts until 6th, 7th grade, into middle school. And in terms of families, you know, I described how my family, we kept reading aloud alive for a long time when I was a child, and I did that with my daughter too. We were just together over the holidays, and she's 24 now, and she studies theater, so she suggested that we read a play aloud together. So we were reading Much Ado About Nothing this winter. So it can stay alive.
Yeah, it was not that book, right?
No, it was not that. No, it's not that book.
Yeah, actually, that's a kind of interesting difference in the language, because I think in the Czech Republic, in Czech language, like reading aloud usually means that teacher is asking kids to read aloud to other kids, right, in the classroom. But understanding
I did that when I was a child too.
Yeah, you did that as well.
Yeah.
Do you do that as well in ISP?
No,
you don't do that?
Very rare. It's very not in that choral way of like going around a group. Yeah, it's different.
Okay, and what about if child struggles with reading techniques and finds reading difficult? How can teachers and parents support him or her?
So that gets down to figuring out why. Why are they struggling? And that's where that part of coaching of like assessing and understanding children is so important. If the child is older, it turns out that it's incredibly important and powerful to actually have that conversation with the child. Like, they can tell you, if they're teenagers or even a bit younger, they can tell you what's hard about it for them. And sometimes we overlook that step. But for younger children, 5, 6, 7, if some difficulties start to emerge, assessing, figuring out, are there letter sounds that they haven't learned, or what is the part that they're struggling with, so that we can directly spend our teaching time on that, and not the part they already know, but the one thing they don't understand.
Yeah. What are the common reasons actually for struggling?
It really varies depending on where a child is in their reading journey, and I know the languages are different, so I don't want to overgeneralize, but there is a challenge in figuring out print. You know, these symbols represent a sound. You know, it's a bit abstract actually, and so sometimes that doesn't click right away, and then you have to figure out those sounds and you have to blend them. So there are challenges around decoding, but there are also challenges around comprehension. Like, how do you figure out what something means, or how do you figure out what a word means when you don't know that word? Or so there's so many different skills. That's why it's quite important. Each child is slightly different to figure out what it is for that child.
Yeah. And what about parents? How parents can support children with reading difficulties?
Yeah.
And this like 6, 7, 8 years old children.
I think for parents, my most frequently I recommend to parents is to be in close communication with teachers to understand what the identified goal is. teachers may give parents like recommendations. It would be helpful if you practice this or if you practice that. So the teacher may give but as much as possible, if the relationship between child and parent can remain one of like pleasure and fun and positive associations with books, we keep that motivation, that desire to kind of enter the club of reading. The parent doesn't have to become like quiz, testing the child, because that creates some friction, can let the learning of the skills happen at school. So the support comes by maintaining the joy, I would say.
Yeah, I can tell you my experience, actually, our experience in the family. Our middle son, he was struggling with reading in grade 2nd, 3rd. Mm-hmm. So basically we didn't want him to be alone in that, right? So we created kind of reading club in the evening, and everybody in the family just sit around the table or in kitchen and would read, actually. Yeah. So he doesn't feel alone in that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that community is so important, that support.
Yeah. Okay, and what about competition of video games and computers?
Aha. Video games and computers. So, it's quite interesting. Sometimes it's even said more broadly, like technology and books. And it's an artificial dichotomy, because in our world, we all of us as adults, we work with both, right? Technology, there are very real needs for technology and the skills associated with those. I think so as parents, it's knowing how kids are using technology, helping them use technology for ways that may be creating content or communicating or recording things. When it comes to video games, it's quite interesting because video games have this quality of stimulation of the brain that is, it's a bit addictive. Like we desire that experience. And so it requires a lot of adult oversight to see what's happening there. And I think this is where that intentionality, it's like video games didn't exist when I was 6, but that's what my father was saying. Like, I have to be intentional. I realize my children have started watching TV all the time, and if I want them to really love books, we're going to have to interrupt this somehow. And I think the interrupting, it requires a bit of compassion, actually, because to think about it, it's fun. The video games are fun. Like it's seductive. And so instead of it being a punishment, there needs to be a replacement. And what are we going to do instead of that? That involves a relationship between child and parent, and it draws them into books. I think also as adults, we need to monitor ourselves and how much time we spend on technology, and how that's impacting our relationships. I know that when we're getting home after a busy day, we need to make dinner, and you might just check our phone to see if there are some messages and quickly dispatch those. But in doing that, in that transition, when you've just walked in the house with your child, you're missing that opportunity to connect face-to-face and have face-to-face contact together. And so it's bigger than just video games. It's how is technology part of our relationships, I would say.
Yeah, and how are books part of our relationship as well, right? I'm always telling our parents, create love for reading before love of mobile phoning.
Yes, yeah.
Because the other way is more difficult.
It's very much more difficult. I wanted to maybe read this quote. I have it out here because my expertise is much more in reading and less in video games. Yeah. So I thought, well, I'm going to check. I happened to attend a workshop with this person, Dr. Catherine Steiner Adar, and she wrote a book called Disconnect, Protecting Childhood and Family Relationships in the Digital Age. And she talks about smartphones. They're not really phones. They're very powerful stimulants to our brains, and they're designed to grab our attention. So she talks about social media as kind of designed to deprive kids of their capacity to engage in the real world. So it pulls our attention away from real world things. And it's not just books, but it's relationships, it's outdoor play. And so it's much bigger than that. And I think I don't have a lot of information about this, but you read a little bit and it's very sobering, because giving a young baby a phone to calm them down if they're crying, it works. You know, it does, it works. But it works because it's a stimulant. Just like a cup of coffee is a stimulant, or anything that's a stimulant. And so by soothing a baby with a stimulant, it actually changes wiring in our brain. And then it's harder for that baby to self-soothe later without the stimulant. So really, it's a complex issue because we've started to rewire our brains a bit. And it takes patience and determination as a parent to set boundaries with that and course correct when it goes wrong.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talking about like how to make kids go away from technology to books, right? But there is not so much talking about like how to do it in early ages, right? So it doesn't get to this situation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Once I actually went to some workshop in the International School of Prague with some external psychologists, and she said there should be a limit of up to 2 hours for like 6-7 years old, like screen time a day. That was like, I felt like that's really so much, you know, because I feel this is like already creating the habits, right? Which one year later, habit. 1 year later, you will have to deal with the screen time, you know, and that's,
Yeah, I would say much less, and I think even after the pandemic, official recommendations have come down from that.
Yeah, obviously, because during the pandemic, the schools actually, most of them went online, right? Okay, and you told me actually a story about one mom who came to you that wanted to, if you remember, if you can.
Yeah, we had done a parent workshop, and we had talked really about these things, the importance of connection and relationship between parent and child with the books, and just that positive time of interacting with books. And that's really how children are learning what books are all about. And afterwards she came and she apologized. She said, "I'm so sad and I'm so sorry because I didn't know. I found what I thought were the best apps, and I was having my child really basically do flashcards on an iPad to try to help them read. And that child hadn't had access to any books at home. And so it's with the very best intentions. You know, sometimes the marketing is very strong, like, do this thing and your child will be successful for life. And we want that for our children. So it's, yeah.
Okay, and what about older children, and what about if things go wrong? Let's imagine 15 years old boy who plays video games and doesn't want to read. Is everything lost?
No. It's funny, that scenario very much describes the son of a very good friend of mine. She's a teacher, so she's passionate about reading herself. She's an avid reader herself. She knows everything we've talked about tonight. Like, none of this is hidden from her, and her son is that 15-year-old boy. Okay. Reading is hard for him. They restrict his iPad and video time, but as soon as he gets it, that's all he wants to do, and it's... So Sarah was really trying to figure out what to do, and it's what I was saying before, having a little bit of compassion for the child and understanding why. Why is it? What is it? You know, it's also very seductive at that age because of the social connection. If all of your friends play those video games and that's what they're talking about, you feel left out. You feel like then you don't fit in. So it's having some understanding. And what I call finding replacement activities that stress relationships. So in this case, it had nothing to do with reading, but Sarah and her son William started going to kickboxing classes together. And it was really about, it was something else he wanted to do, but it was about building their relationship. And then they would listen to books together when they had long drives in the car. So it's coming back to connection and relationship and just looking for ways that will work with your child.
Yeah, surprisingly, helping children is connected to having good relationship,
yes.
right?
Yeah, very much.
And
so.
yeah, starting with the relationship may be more important than, because I can imagine a lot of people would say, you know, you stop watching or playing computer games, and you have the book over here, right? Mm-hmm. But usually it ends up as hating books, right?
Yeah, somehow there has to be both, and you know, or some limit that's going to work without creating a hate for, you know, like I hate reading. So it's finding that limit that works, where there is a limit with the video games, but then there's access to reading in a way that's going to be positive and supported, you know. So if he's struggling and there's a reason he's struggling, how to support him with that.
Yeah. I have one family in my mind that the boy was playing a lot, computer games a lot, and they actually found a way through cycling. He started to cycle with his friend and going out, right? And then it made better and better. Right?
Yeah, finding those replacement activities.
Yeah, finding those replacements. And another question, shall we as teachers decide for children what they read and up to what age? Okay,
this is an interesting question, because in terms of love for reading, let's just, if we take it from that angle, fostering, nurturing, growing a love for reading, choice ends up being one of the more important aspects. So even if we imagine ourselves, if I told you all now the next 10 books you have to read are the ones I give you, that would be less motivating than if I brought 100 books and let you choose the 10 you most want to read.
Yeah.
I don't know if that...
I'm not sure that we might have a problem with
that. Okay.
Yeah.
So your question was about teachers choosing what kids read. There's also at times a very compelling reason to make that choice, because you're trying to teach a certain skill set, and so you need a book that will help give kids a chance to practice that. I remember I was doing a session with a group of teachers where I was in the classroom, and there were maybe 10 teachers in the room, and together I was working to show them how we could help kids develop their skills with reading nonfiction. And everything was planned. I had planned it so carefully. It was like a lab site we were practicing. I was so excited. And then it turns out the kids had no nonfiction books to read. So it was a bit of a problem. Like, I had the most perfect lesson, but no books to practice it in. So it's kind of a both and. Sometimes we do have to decide what they're reading so they can learn the skills that we want them to learn. But really, in terms of motivating lifelong love of reading, choice is the thing. And around second, third grade, one of the things I talk to teachers about is helping kids develop the skills to identify a book that will be good for them. So a good fit book is a book that looks interesting to me, but also a book I can read that's not too hard for me. Yeah. And that's actually a difficult skill, but it's a lifelong skill. Like, if we can all walk into a library or a bookstore and find a book that we're going to like, that indicates that we're probably have a love of reading.
Because some of the Czech schools would have a list of books that children are supposed to read, probably starting from middle school. What do you think about that?
Yeah, we have this too. It happens. Like, I know schools in the States do that too. I think that I'd be curious how a book makes it on the list. And I'd say I'd encourage parents to read them with their kids or get 2 copies and read side by side and talk about them. There are certainly really valid reasons for a book to make it on the list, but just to be told to read it without discussing that and say, why is that book on the list? Maybe it's missing the point of it.
Yeah. And what about rereading? If child reads the same book again and again?
Well, just case in point, I advocate rereading. This is not this book, rereading. And then there's another book in here. This one, this is so funny. I've read it probably, I don't know, a lot. It plays with language. It's great for first grade. It's called The Hungry Thing. And last year I was reading it to a group of first graders, and they showed me something in the book I hadn't noticed before. So there's always that possibility of deepening your understanding when you're not working so hard on the text, then you see new things. I think, also let's take Harry Potter. That's a very popular example. Children get exposed to Harry Potter when they're quite young these days, and I think it's fair to say that they don't understand a lot of it. All right, they don't. So by rereading when they're older and have more life experience, more knowledge, more vocabulary, more everything, they've read other books, they can make connections, they'll understand it better. And it's actually more fun then. They see things that they didn't see before. So.
Yeah, that's what I asked our oldest son, actually, why are you reading Harry Potter for the 11th time? And he told me, every time I learn more and more. Yeah. Right?
And it's fun. It's fun.
And what about if you have a feeling that the child is reading the book again and again because he or she is worried about making another step?
This is really important. So this is like one of the superpowers of teachers, is to really know our kids really well. One is rereading the book supporting the child, and one is it like getting in their way, and they need that little nudge. And so that's just knowing the child and watching them closely and seeing their pattern of reading, and then being in position to sit side by side with them to help them make that little leap, bridge them up. So, yeah, it can be both situations, definitely.
Yeah. And I know in the United States and in England, people organize book clubs. Do you think this idea might be useful for kids as well?
Yeah, most definitely. Book clubs, like at all levels, are just wonderful opportunities for children to respond to the text, to deepen their understanding of the text by talking about it. But one of the favorite book clubs I've heard of recently, I loved this idea. So right around, say, 10th, 11th grade, when you really don't even know what your kids are doing much because they're off in their own world and they don't need you so much anymore, a group of parents formed their own book club and to read the books that their children were being assigned in school. And so then they read together and discussed, and they had some idea of what it was, and then they could talk with their children at home. I thought that was very clever. I've also heard of parent-child book clubs, like around middle school age, where the parent and the child go together. We have book clubs in school. But that it's an opportunity for us to practice and grow the skill of thinking and comprehending what we're reading. Yeah,
and it's building the relationship again.
And the relationships, right? It's always back to that.
Yeah.
And it's fun. I mean, I'm in book clubs, adult book clubs. I have a friend at school, and she just commented that she and her mother and sisters have formed a book club together. They live in different places, but they meet on Zoom and talk about the books. So it can be a lifelong practice.
Yeah. Does it mean that they read the same chapter and then they talk about the chapter? Or?
I think they're reading the whole book and then coming and talking about it.
About the whole book afterwards. Okay, we are getting close to 8 o'clock, so I have a final question for you. please, can you share with us your top tips for teachers and maybe for parents as well, but first for teachers?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this. I think I've said a lot of it, but to summarize and like kind of wrap it up into maybe 5 things that we could number. I really would emphasize the importance of volume of reading. Like if you think of something you're really, really good at, anything that you're really good at, cooking or playing an instrument or a sport, anything, it's because you've done it a lot. And so reading a lot will help you improve as a reader. And there's this little like rhyme that goes like this: where there's skill, there's will. So that means as you improve as a reader, you're more motivated to read. Yeah. So that would be tip number 1, the volume of reading. Tip number 2 is the good fit book idea. So, I have a book to illustrate this idea. There was a 5th grade boy. He was kind of low volume of reading. I thought, I need to bump up his reading. So he didn't like any book. He didn't like this book, he didn't like this. And I thought, I know the book. And this is a book, it's called The Great Brain, and it's about boys, and they're kind of mischievous and naughty. And I thought, this is going to be a perfect book. My brother liked it, I liked it. I'm like, I know this is going to be great. I gave it to Alex, he did not like it. So it's getting the right book into kids' hands, knowing books as teachers, knowing books as parents, reading them ourselves. That's tip number 2. Like, we help kids progress in reading by getting them into books they love. I had taught kindergarten and 1st grade for most of my career, and then I got a job as a 4th grade teacher, and I walked into the classroom and I didn't know any of the books. So I spent the whole 1st year reading the library from one side to the other, because I felt, how can I suggest a book to a child if I don't even know it myself? So reading lots of books, knowing the books so you can help kids make good fit. I would say there's this idea about culture of reading or building a reading life at home, when you have routines at home that support a reading life. At school, having kind of maybe reading buddies across grades, having books all around you, celebrating reading. This bag actually was a bag of my daughters in 3rd grade. They made these bags and it just says, I read. So it's just like, it's part of the culture of your life. So that would be tip number 3, maybe. Tips 4 and 5. 4, I think a really important tip for us in the education field is this idea of supporting readers. So volume of reading is important. Good fit books are important, but we don't just throw books at kids and say, that's enough, you're going to learn to read. we have to assess and see, what are they learning? What are they not learning? What do I need to teach them? So it's supporting them. And last, I would say helping kids set goals and celebrating their accomplishments. One thing, I brought another professional book. It's called Book Love, and it's written by Penny Kittle. But one of the things she did is she started, this is a small picture, but it's a picture of a high school boy, and he has a stack of books that goes from the table up to his head. So it's all the books he's read that year. So he set goals of how many books he's going to read in a school year, and then having a celebration. So I think that's a really important part of motivation.
Yeah. And if you should say 1 or 2 suggestions for parents.
A lot of those are the same. So the volume and the good fit books, culture of reading. There's all the parent side of it, like helping children read a lot, helping children get books. Maybe we give books as gifts sometimes. Maybe we go to libraries together, helping them find books. And also, just like me, when I was a 4th grade teacher and I didn't know the books in my classroom, sometimes as parents, we have to read the books our kids are reading to know and to be able to talk about them.
Yeah, and the question is, who is responsible for building the love for reading, right?
Right. Well, I would say it's the adults, right? It's the teachers and parents who...
Yeah, working together, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathy.
Thank you.
And now we have space for questions from the audience. And it's totally okay to speak in Czech because we will have a translation. And just we need them just to wait a little bit for the microphone.
It's a short question. Hi, Andrea, my name. What do you think about audiobooks?
Yeah, it's a great question. Audiobooks have just such an important place in I would say the whole diet of reading, everything you're reading. They offer children access to books that they can't read by themselves, and so they can think. But it can't be everything. It can't be, just like there are now, they developed during the pandemic so many books that are online. Like there is a program called Epic where the book is there and the child's looking at a computer screen and turning pages. I have concerns about that sometimes because it's very easy just to go like this and they're not doing the thinking that's involved in the reading. So, for me, it's kind of a both and. I really encourage for parents to use audiobooks like as part of a long car trip, because then you're all in the car listening to the book together and you can talk about it. Sometimes audiobooks can be just part of what happens during a school day. For in my situation where the instruction is in English, but maybe the child doesn't know English very well yet, and so they're becoming accustomed to hearing the language, and they have the book that they're turning the pages. So it's really just meeting the needs of the child, I would say. Yeah.
And
other questions?
And I think we are again getting back to relationship, right? Mm-hmm. When you have when driving a long drive, and it's so easy to put the screen, but there is no connection, right, between the adults and the children.
Right. I mean, I remember when we read on tape or on cassette, on CD, A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle as a family. I mean, it was a great book, but we were listening to it on that drive, and we talked about it together still. So.
Yeah, what's your opinion on like physical books versus ebooks? I do have a personal struggle because like my kids' books are only exclusively physical, but mine are almost ebooks because of some reasons, and I'm reading on my iPad. Mm-hmm. And usually when my kids see me reading, and I'm really avid reader, I read almost 100 books a year. So I read really a lot. So when they see me reading on the iPad, they're like, "We want to play the games. We want to."
So interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a book to them. Mm. How do you feel about reading on the iPad? Do you like it? Does it work for you?
Actually, there were some reasons I switched to ebooks. One of them was the space, because I don't have a library big enough to have so many books. And then as well, our library in here is like a new thing that they allow to borrow ebooks. So it's more convenient. So I'm okay with it right now, just because it's convenient. I prefer the physical books, but I usually read and listen to like 2 books at once and 1 audiobook. So it's just more about the convenience.
Yeah. I'm the same, exactly. It's a matter of convenience, and sometimes it's just so nice to have access to that. I do understand, though, from a child's point of view, visually it looks like you're on your iPad again, right? So I just wonder about those kind of celebrations, or having some way to, your own record of all the books that you've read, like... a friend of mine who's a librarian, it's her personal goal to read 100 books a year. And so she keeps a record of that. In her signature on an email, it's always the current book she's reading. So you know, and it's kind of like we influence each other. She influences me. I like a lot of the books she reads, and I see what she's reading, and I'm like, oh, I want to read that now. So, you know, maybe there's other ways to make your reading visible to your children is what I'm trying to say, and thinking about that, because making our reading visible is an important part of being in a community of readers.
Yeah, I do have a reading journal, so sometimes we discuss about that. But yeah, it's I don't want to switch back to physical books.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a personal struggle.
Yeah, I understand.
I've been trying to think about how to word this question. I just have to have a little preface. I have 2 grandchildren, Kathy knows. And my daughter does an amazing job of having books everywhere and at their eye level, and they always know what books. The dilemma in their house is that Isla's 2 and Caleb is 5, and they fight over whose book you're going to read. So when I come to visit, I'll say, I'll read you some books, and then they start arguing who gets the book first and which book am I going to read first. So this is really, I need grandmother advice. How do you manage? You get this love of reading, and then what do you do? And how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's so tricky, right? I think what you're describing, this is going to sound almost unbelievable, but it's true. When my daughter was that age, like 5, 6, she and our cat would fight for my lap. Like the 2 of them both wanted to be in my lap, and that's kind of what you're describing. And so, you know, sometimes you get both of them in your lap and you say, well, we're going to read one of Caleb's, one of Isla's. Or sometimes it's like, oh, wow, let's plan a special Caleb Nana Day, and we're just going to do that in a special Island Nana Day. So it's kind of a both and, I think, you know, but how delightful that they both want that so much. You know, and they're learning from each other too.
Yeah, I think sometimes love of reading gets difficult, right? We go on a bike trip as a family every year, as you know, Cindy, and actually we have to carry everything on the bikes, right? And one of the bag is actually a library. Yeah.
This is when my daughter was really young. We lived in India, and we would go on these long kind of remote trips. And we had a rule, the 20 book rule, because we didn't have access to electronic readers at that point. So the 20 book rule, but 20 books, that's a lot of books. But, you know, it had, like, we'd be gone for 3 weeks, and you had to reread those 20 books a lot to make it work for 3 weeks. So, yeah, it can be challenging, but worth it.
Dobrý večer, já jsem se chtěla zeptat, o čem vypovídá a jak pomoci, když naše děti mají tendenci si domýšlet slova v rámci toho čtení. Děkuji.
That's a really great question. It's a tricky one because it is a reading strategy, but it has to be coupled with monitoring and self-correcting when it doesn't work. So what I want to say is that learning to read is really built on a foundation of strong oral language. Children who are very verbal and have a lot of oral language in their early childhood and have been read, they've been read to, they can anticipate how a sentence is going to go. They can guess. They can predict the word. That's actually a good strategy. It means we have a mind map for how our language fits together, and it helps us build fluency and understand. And it has to be matched with checking to see if we got it right. And if something doesn't, that self-monitoring, that we go back and fix it up. As teachers, if we see that it's a child's dominant strategy, is kind of word guessing or predicting, then that's when we would take that kind of data and we'd say, we need to back up and maybe make sure you have all your skills for sounding a word out. And that you're not just doing this to hide something that you don't know how to do. So,
does it mean you would speak directly to the child, or how would it work?
Definitely. Yeah, I as much as possible try to make the process of learning to read very transparent and not hidden. So children are very clear on the targets of what they need to learn how to do. And not only what they need to learn how to do, but why is it important? And then what are the steps for how they do that? So I call that what, why, and how teaching points. So it's very transparent what the target is for the child.
Yeah. And we have some questions from the Facebook as well, but we can wait a bit. Yeah.
Dobrý večer, já jsem se chtěla zeptat na knihy, které se čtou formou elektronické tužky, protože hodně rodičů vím, že se na to ptá, jestli je to vhodné a v jakém věku. Tak jestli můžu. Já se přiznám, 2-3 roky zpátky se hodně vlastně preferovala digitalizace do školek mateřských, kdy vlastně se řešilo tady toto, že se vlastně pořizovaly albitušky do těch mateřských škol. Tak co si o tom myslíte vy?
You might need to help me. I don't know what an e-pencil or an e-pen
I think that those are the books which, and you have an electronic pen, and when you touch, it started to speak to you. That's correct, right?
It's a bit interactive.
Yeah, it's you might have a full page picture. And with different parts, and then if you touch this part, then it starts to speak to you. And so that's usually like a non-fiction book, right? It could be about history or whatever, space. Or
Okay, so I was thinking it was a story. When I hear you describe it, nonfiction books, it almost sounds like a museum exhibition, like you can see something and you can push to get information. And so it's interactive in that way. So what that's providing is the child has the ability to interact with something to get information and seek the information. Is it really helping them learn to read or develop a love of reading? Probably less so than continuous text and like the first question we had about listening to a book, you know, and you're listening to the whole book and getting the language, and you have to listen and think and build the comprehension to go along with it. Or the other example of an e-reader when you're reading. I think I shy away from reading experiences that don't really match what it's like for us to read a book. So if it becomes more like just touching things and it's fun to make it make sounds, it's really less and less like reading and more like a toy that makes noise. And but I'm not familiar with this, and I'd have to look more. I'm also very cautious about like having absolutes, like absolutely you can't read this or can't do that, because it always sets up a child to only want that one thing then. So we don't want to do that either. So it's always having the balance, but I tend to lean in favor of books and continuous text. And then when it comes to nonfiction, teaching kids how to navigate nonfiction to get information from it? Do you look at the picture captions? You know, nonfiction is complicated that way. So how do you get information out of a nonfiction text? And it requires a lot of active work on our part as a reader, and we need to learn that skill of where to look and how to get it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of kids get really a lot of information from a picture book, even when they cannot read, right? They really make whole stories around it,
Definitely.
right?
Yeah.
Kathy, you made me think about graphic novels. Can you talk about the how they support or don't support reading and your opinion about graphic novels?
Yeah, we've really been exploring that with a group of fourth graders this year because they're very popular. So it goes back to that understanding high interest texts, like what is it about graphic novels that are compelling for children and why are they so popular? And we didn't have them when we were 10. So we have to do the hard work of figuring that out. Like, that's a little bit on us as adults to figure it out and not just brush it off. It turns out, having done this hard work myself recently, it turns out that graphic novels are not just one level. They're very complex. There can be graphic novels that are actually written more for adults in terms of the themes and concepts, and they offer a different way of pulling the reader into the information or the story. So what we ended up doing with these fourth graders is kind of an inquiry into what do readers need to do to be successful at reading a graphic novel? Like, to be really good at reading graphic novels, what are the skills and strategies? And then let's practice those. And make sure that we're using those when we read. The interesting thing is that then it's inviting children into that reflective process, reflecting on their own reading, and that was kind of one of the tips at the end of setting goals and celebrating success and progress. So the field of reading continues to change. The types of books change, and we have some responsibility to understand that and see what it's all about. We also have some responsibility to encourage children to move beyond just one thing, like not to stay stuck. I would hope that a child's not going to spend now from being 10 for the rest of their lives reading only graphic novels. So then we need to have that power as the kind of caring adult, the expert in the room, to hook them into another book. Maybe we read it aloud first, and after we read it aloud, they want to reread it. They see the excitement. Or I like to do this trick of reading aloud first chapters of books sometimes, and then just make the book available for kids to finish. So we have that. I think one of your questions was what's important for early readers, and I think our passion for the books. So.
Good evening, Katie. You were mentioning controlling and monitoring. I was wondering, where is the limit? If we do the loud reading, I have a second grader son, and to not demotivate him. You know, if you are talking about the written, the intonation, the mistakes, where is the limit to, hey mom, you are constantly, you know,
yeah. It's such a great question. It's such a great question. Our kids do a good job of telling us that we've gone too far, and then we have to listen. That's the hard part, because you know, I'm a mom too, and there is this feeling of like, I just want to teach you this one more thing. You know, I can teach this to you. I can help you. But it's not about getting it perfect. It's just about having the habit of reading and loving the reading and being willing to do it a lot and making mistakes and learning from that. So maybe in that case, it's sometimes I recommend really encouraging and supporting rereading of books because we get better the more we read them, or book sharing, like I'll read a page, you read a page, and going back and forth, things like that. I also encourage parents to feel the freedom to realize that there is a cadre of teachers also helping, so you don't have to be the only one to teach your child. You can just kind of focus on the fun and pleasure of it and not quiz them. So that's my usual answer to that question.
We've got some questions from our Facebook friends. I've chosen 2 to 3 questions depending on the time we have left. First, I'd like to know about the importance of fairy tales. Some people believe they are important because of the concept of good and evil. Other people believe that we should tell them that wolf is just a natural predator. What's your opinion on that, Kathy?
So this question about the importance of fairy tales and how maybe we approach them with children. I think the interesting thing there is fairy tales do offer a way to understand a concept of good and evil, and maybe a wolf is a symbol in that case, symbolizing it. And so it's teaching children about those qualities of literature, having symbols and interpreting literature, and what are the messages and what are the lessons in this book. That's part of comprehension. That's part of the comprehension work that children need to do. So fairy tales might provide an opportunity. We may, as teachers, choose purposely to read fairy tales for a while just to practice that work, that specific work of understanding symbols and lessons. It's also an interesting opportunity in the case of a wolf to talk about how symbols can be, almost moved into the category of stereotypes. So do we see a wolf as always a bad thing? And this may seem like, oh, it's a fairy tale, maybe we're overreaching, but not really. Like in the whole, this is an important idea in the idea of stereotypes. And this is maybe something we haven't talked about so much, but one of the qualities of reading that I'm very passionate about, actually, is it allows us to learn about our world and what it means to be human and how we solve problems without having to make all of those mistakes ourselves. And so we can interrogate text, like asking about wolves, are they really bad, or is it just their natural way, in a way that helps children think about their world differently. So it's an opportunity for us. I don't think it's one way or the other. It really depends on what you're trying to get out of the learning experience, maybe the age of the children. Sometimes we think older children only have to read big, thick, hard, heavy books. Maybe a fairy tale with older children, but talking about stereotypes is an appropriate text. So it depends on your goals. Comes back to that. What is the learning target? And being really clear about that.
Thank you. And yet another question. What sort of books would you recommend for 3-year-olds? I'd like them to be in the spirit of respectful education without violence, punishment, threats, scary things, etc.
So it's completely reasonable for parents or even in a classroom to be seeking a book that has a certain message or is helping children understand a certain lesson. And I think that's up to the adults to choose that. For example, in a pre-K, a classroom of 3-year-olds, we may choose a book that shows children resolving conflict and being friends, because we want to help teach that to them. It's kind of what I was saying before, that books give us this place where we can learn things without having to do it ourselves necessarily. So for parents, we have our own values that we want to transmit to our children, and that's part of being a parent and part of family life. And so we'll find those books that really speak to our hearts and want to share them with our children. I think that it comes back to knowing books, being passionate about that, and sharing it with the children. When we love it and the book is important to us, we can explain that to children and why it's important. I would also say when it comes to that particular age group, 3-year-olds, it's an opportunity at that point in their lives to expose them to so many books. So many different types of books. There's not just one type of book, and a lot of books written for kids that age are very playful with language. They may be rhyming, or they may be silly, or they almost may be a song or a chant. The pictures may be bright and fun. Children love books that are just funny at that age. So again, it comes back to inviting children into the world of books and reading in a way that promotes the love of wanting to read more. So it's not just one kind of book.
Are there any other questions from the audience? I still have got one question, if I may. It's a question from our Facebook fan. How to deal with violence in adventure books for children? Some popular books that are recommended for certain age group contain elements of violence or rather explicit language. Should I use them as an opportunity to show my child the world outside of the family bubble, or shall I be a censor?
The question of censorship. That's a small one to end on. Okay, so tricky, right? Especially the older children are, as soon as we say, you absolutely cannot read that book, that's the only book they want to read. And then what happens is they'll read it without you knowing, and it's a lost opportunity to talk about it. So much better to, if it's something that your child really wants to read, maybe read it first to see and share your concerns. If you still feel that this is not consistent with my values or what I want for my child, to share your concerns with your child and decide how to proceed. Sometimes I actually talk with children, say in maybe the 3rd, 4th grade range, where they're reading and they're reaching for books in middle school because they're popular. But middle school books really have themes that are appropriate to middle school children, not to 9 and 10-year-olds. And what I tell them that. I tell them that's how it is. These books are written about things that aren't familiar to you yet. And right now, you're at an age where there are all these amazing books that you could read, but if you skip over them and read those, you're not going to come back. You're going to miss out. You're going to miss out on all these great books now. That book is still going to be there later, and it will probably make more sense to you then. So it's a decision that we would have to make as parents, but I would really recommend it. I remember this happening with my own daughter in 7th grade. There was a book that was really popular among the girls in her class, and it was on a kind of delicate topic of emotional fragility of teenage girls, and I was concerned about having her read it. And so we settled on the terrain of reading it together, even to the point of reading it out loud and discussing it as we read. And so that would be my recommendation of how to go forward with that. I would add just one caveat, since the issue of technology came out, is to acknowledge that our children are flooded with images of violence and probably language that exceeds what's normal in our homes on a regular basis, just whether it's through media or video games, back to video games really, if we look at the content of those video games, and that we would also maybe be wise to talk to kids about that, the content of those. So.
Yes. There might be one more question.
Good evening. One question from our YouTube channel. Children often tend to choose books depending on the number of pages. The smaller the number, the better for them. How to move them to reading more extensive books, thicker books?
Okay. It's also the opposite is true too. Have you noticed that? The child who likes to carry around the very, very, very big, heavy, Harry Potter is the likely culprit, but they're really not at all ready to be reading that. They really need the thin book. So the question is really, how do you get kids into the right book for them? And I think we were talking about that a bit before, but that's when you really need to kind of sit hip to hip with a child. And if they're keeping themselves artificially in lower books and they need encouragement to move up, then that's when we read some of those books together and kind of create a bridge. So there's reading. We've talked a bit about independent reading, but that's not the only shape that reading. That's not the only way we progress in reading. There's guided reading when teachers are reading with children. There's shared reading when we read together. Maybe that's often with very young children when the text is posted and we're all reading it together. Reading aloud to children. So for that child who's maybe holding back into the safe books, using one of those strategies that's more teacher involved to help them build up in text complexity is what we say, because it's not only about gaining skills, but it's about being able to use those skills in increasingly complex text. That's really the challenge of reading. For the child who chooses text that's too hard and will only carry around that book and insist on that being the book that they want to read, it's a delicate matter because it comes back to reading identity. And if you say, that's not the book for you, you need this little one over here, that can be very crushing, right? Mm-hmm. So oftentimes I do like a little bit of a both and, there's that book going and then another book that we're reading together where I'm doing some instruction. So I'm reluctant to rip a book out of a child's hands.
You mentioned a lot the concept of the right book.
Yes.
For the kids. And we are parents of preschoolers, and we read in the evenings. They know as well those great Disney stories from the movies. And actually listening to you today, it got me to think of what should be the first book, because it's a big milestone for the kid. I learned to read, and this is my first book I'm reading, and I'm completing it. It's a kind of milestone I see. So would you recommend, for instance, going for the stories they know? Like they listen to us, we have few favorite books, so it's like, okay, now you read it, the one you know very well from listening 5 times, 10 times already, or like the story of Elsa and Anna from Frozen, which they love for the last 1 year, and they live in that world of the Disney stories, etc. So, what would be the concept of the right first book in your view?
It's such a good question, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about when you asked me about when a child first reads. And I said, well, to answer that question, we have to decide what is reading. So if the right first book means they're reading all the words correctly, a Disney version of that story may or may not work, because they may know the story very well, but they may be able to tell it by looking at the pictures, but the words themselves, to get it accurately, might be beyond them as a beginning reader. And so what we do with children at that age is we have book boxes in school, but you could do a similar sort of thing where there are different kinds of books. This is a book I can picture read. I know the story very well. My teacher or my parents have read it to me many, many times. So I can turn the pages, and I even remember some of the phrases from the book because I've got it memorized. So I can turn, and I can say those phrases and then add a little more. That's an important part of building a reading identity, understanding how language works, how stories work. That's all part of learning to read. We also have to learn that part of learning to read, which is decoding actual words. And so having books that support that also. So children have more than one way to be successful. So in other words, I would say there's more than one first book. There's a multiple range of first books, and we can celebrate all of them because it means all of them mean your child's a reader.
Hello. Hi. I have a classmate who I don't think he has ever read a book, but. And he often argues with me, is it really so necessary to read? I think he is going to be really successful and well paid even without reading. And me personally, I think that reading is really essential, but what would you tell me?
How could I argue that point? Yeah. There are a couple things that come to mind. Two things actually. One, quality of life. So, what do we do to relax and slow ourselves down, especially at the end of the day? Like video games? Yeah. Watch Netflix. But that stimulates our brain, and it actually interrupts our sleep. And the blue light from screens is problematic for our sleep, and it affects our health. That's just true. It is a true thing. And so in terms of well-being, having something that we can do for leisure and to relax and slow down and is a way to soothe ourselves that's not a stimulant, that is that's a life skill for a good and healthy life. So that is one thing I would say to him. He may not buy it right now because it doesn't probably matter to him that much right now. But when you get older, being able to sleep and be healthy, it does matter. So it's a good time to build that skill. The second thing I would say is that for me, I don't mean to say this as like an over-dramatization, but reading makes me a better human being. I can learn about people and develop empathy and compassion for situations that I would never have access to without reading. And that matters in this world. That matters probably more than anything as we face the challenges that we have today. So maybe that's a good place to end.
Yeah. I actually asked our oldest son, who read Harry Potter 11 times, when after reading 11 times he watched the movie finally, and asked him about comparing the movie and the book, and he said it was like 10%. Like,
yeah, it's always disappointing, right?
Yeah.
The movie.
So he is losing those 90%. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you have further questions, the time is up. And we are going to bid our farewells. Kathy, thank you very much for this evening. Thank you for this interesting discussion, for your answers, for inspiring us. Honza, thank you for asking questions. I'd like to thank all of you for being here with us, for having questions. I hope you've been inspired. You've got some food for thought. To those of you who've been with us on stream, we'd like to apologize for some technical hiccups at the beginning. We did our best to solve them as fast as we could. It's a message to you. You should be here in person next time. Děkuji.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kathy. It was so great pleasure to have you over here.
These are gorgeous. Thank you. It was truly my pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and for your questions. Yeah, it's inspiring to have this conversation with you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
These are gorgeous.
Okay.
Okay.